So yesterday we finished with the Toledot of the earth, and we said that the beginning of the creation very closely related to the new creation. And we can present the entire story of the earth as a big Toledot. So the entire Bible is the big Toledot of the earth. And it really makes sense, especially when we speak about the book of Revelation. And do you remember the fable of the book of Revelation is based on the book, and this book is important. Nobody was able to open it until the Lamb of God approached God the Father, and he was the one who was able to open the book. And after that, and this is described in chapter 5 of the book of Revelation, and after that we can see that Jesus, or Lamb of God, starts to open the seals of the book. And finally, when he opens the last seal, the seal number 7, we expect that something should happen, and we can read what is written inside the book. But surprisingly, the book of Revelation doesn't tell us anything about what is written in the book after the 7th seal is opened or removed. But in book of Revelation chapter 13 and verse 8, if I'm not mistaken, the content of the book is revealed. And in this case, it is said that this is the book of those who are saved. So it looks like the book that Jesus was opening contained the names of the people who are saved. In this case, the names, do you see, are also very much related to the Toledot, because as we see, it is not only the Bible which is the Toledot, but the entire history of the earth can be presented as a big Toledot. So in this case, this Toledot is thus generations or records of the names of those who are saved. So I just tell you this because I want to show you the close connection between those ideas about the Toledot that we can find in Genesis 2 verse 4, and later on theme of the book of the saved in the entire Bible. Okay, now we have to move to another very important topic, and this is Genesis chapter 2 and verses 5 and 6. So when we do remember that this passage became very important for the framework theory, because different modifications of the framework theory are based upon this verse, or this passage is used as an argument to promote the framework theory. And one of the idea behind the framework theory, or the key idea behind the framework theory, is that the days are not sequential. So we shouldn't understand the description of the days as a sequence of the events. And we need to understand them as just thematically put together, and in such a way they have, the author combined them not because of the chronological sequence, but he combined everything because of some thematic arrangements. And the story of this passage, Genesis 2, 5, 6, and describes the state of the earth, and everything depends on how to understand it. So, for example, the representatives of the framework theory, they just say that, do you see, the creation of man is written in two different passages, so we shouldn't understand them as a chronological order, or it is just thematically combined together. And on the one hand, this description or this approach for interpretation looks sound. But on the other hand, it is not as sound as it may seem to be. Okay, so now what is the problem with the interpretation of this passage? And now I want to show you the passage in Hebrew. So it starts from 2:4b. 2:4a, if this is the statement about the Toledot, this is the generations of the heaven and the earth. And after that we have Beyom Asot Adonai Elohim Eretz Veshamaya Vekol Siach Hasadeh Terem Yichya Ba'aretz Vekol Eshev Hasadeh Terem Yitzmach Ki lo himtir Adonai Elohim al ha'aretz ve'adam ayin la'avot et ha'adama ve'et ya'aleh min ha'aretz ve'hishka et kol pene ha'adama. So this is the passage that we need to focus on, and here we have different problems of the interpretation of the passage, and some of them were noticed by David Tsumura. So you know this author, Japanese scholar, and he what he says in his book: judging from the discourse analysis of the narrative story in Genesis 2:4-26, 2:4 as a whole is a temporal description, while 2:5-6 is a setting for the first stated event, Vayiser Adonai Elohim, the Lord God formed, in 2:7, just as 1:1 is a temporal description in the beginning, while 1:2 is a setting for the first stated event, Vayomer Elohim. In 1:3, like 1:2, the settings describe the initial state of the earth, which is in a close relationship with the waters. So he wrote a book where he tries to analyze the water system before the fall, and this is his statement from this book. So what he is going to tell about this short paragraph, I just want to refer you back to this slide where we have the Hebrew text. And what he is saying is that this one, Beyom Asot Adonai Elohim Eretz Veshamayim, is very similar to Genesis 1. So this statement, according to him, is very similar to Genesis 1. After that, we have this statement about these shrubs of the field and green plants. So they didn't exist at that time, and there was no rain. There was no rain on the earth, and there was no man. There was no man. And the only thing that happened, that the mist went up from the land and watered all the face of the earth. So this is, he says that the first line is very similar to to Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. After that, in the first chapter of the book of Genesis, we had a description of the earth before the creation. And he says that the next, this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines is also the description of the earth before the creation. And after that, we have Vaiktol form, Vayitzar Adonai. So when God created a man from the dust. And after that, we have the Weiktal form, Weiktal chain. So in this case, structurally, it looks like it is very similar. It is very similar to the description of the first chapter of the book of Genesis. And based on this issue, he says that this is the parallel account. So we need to understand this one as a repetition of the first line is a repetition of Genesis 1:1. And after that is just like a repetition of the Genesis 1:2. So this is another way to describe the earth as tohu vavohu. So is it clear? Is his argument clear?
Yes, bro.
Okay.
But
yes.
Do we take it wholesome?
Pardon?
Are we in full agreement with him, really?
Oh, now we need to understand this. Of course not. We do not accept everything that he says. And of course, we do not understand as these verses 5 and 6 as the description of the earth before the creation. But many people do like this. And because of that, they say that this is the parallel account. And we also agree that this is a parallel account. But our understanding that in chapter 2, we have only the description of the day number 6, not the description of the entire process of creation. And definitely we do not agree that this is a description of the tohu vavohu. Okay, shall we continue? Shall we continue?
Yes.
So let us continue. So recent Bible translations, yes, this is also from the book of Tsumura. What he says. Recent Bible translations are divided between two possibilities. The position which takes the Adam ayin la avot et ha'adama, the last statement, no man was there to till the land as a part of the key cause. And second option, that which takes it as outside of this key clause. The former position attributes the lack of vegetation only to the lack of rain, but also to the absence of man, the latter only to the lack of rain. So I just give you example how it is interpreted in different versions. Like this one is NCV, and it says, there were still no plants on the earth. Nothing was growing in the fields because the Lord God had not yet made it rain on the land. And there was no person to care for the ground. But a mist would rise up from the earth and water all the ground. So do you see they put a full period? They put a period here. And because of that, they divided this sentence on two parts. Like there was no plants on the earth. Why? Because there was no rain. So this is the logic of this translation. And there was no person to care for the ground. So there is nobody who can cultivate the ground, but it was cultivated through the this water system, special water system. This is one way, and this translation is very similar. No plant of the field was yet on the earth, and no herb of the field had yet sprung up. For Yahweh God has not caused it to rain on the earth. And also the period here. There was not a man to till the ground, but a mist went up from the earth and watered the whole surface of the ground. So the idea is that the absence of the plants is because there was no rain. And this is, it is grouped together. These two issues are grouped together. And the other issue is the absence of the man and who is doing like irrigation and it was sold by this water system that is described in verse 6. This is one translation. Another translation, and this one is more popular, is to make these two issues like the absence of the shrub of the field is because of the two reasons. The first one, there was no rain, and the another one, there was no man. So do you see how they divided it? There is no shrub of the field yet grown on the earth, and no plant of the field had yet sprouted, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain on the earth, and there was no man to cultivate the ground. So they put a period in another place, and because of this, the meaning of the entire passage changed a little bit. So, and the same we can say about NRSV translation. And I need to tell that this translation is more popular, and this interpretation is more popular. But Sumura actually clings to the first one, and he says, based on the different arguments, mostly on this rhythmic idea and parallelism, that this section, the first section, is so it is grouped together and it is divided from this section, because do you see he noticed those parallels like kol ba'aretz, kol haaretz. So he put like a comma or this separation here, and he said that Adam, this section, that there was no Adam to cultivate the ground, is not included into this section. But this is just a minor issue. This is just a minor issue about the interpretation. But the most important issue of the interpretation of the oh yeah, here he says, this is also from Tsumura, that structurally verses 5 and 6 are better divided into two halves. The first is concerned with the wild uncultivated plants, shrub and plant on the earth. The second with man who tills the land and the add water which watered the land. So he wants to divide it here. The first one is no rain and no plants. And the second one is man and water system. In other words, Genesis 2, 5, 6 presents a twofold description of the earth. The first section speaks broadly about the unproductive and bare earth, in which even the wild plants were not yet growing because of the lack of rain. And the second, more specifically about the land, which has no man to till it and is watered throughout by the add waters. And in his book, he discussed a lot about this add. So what is the meaning of the add, where it came from, and what it could be, because it is his concern to describe the water system that had existed before the fall. Okay, so this is one issue, how to divide it. And I personally do not think that it should be divided, because I think that it is related, and Adam here is also included in this key clause, even because of this vav conjunction. So we shouldn't divide it here. I think that this is just artificial division. But the most important issue is how to interpret bush of the field and grass of the field. So I just want to refer you back to this translation and draw your attention to this phrase. There were still no plants on the earth. Nothing was growing in the field, and so on. So do you see in this interpretation, or those translators, they interpreted this statement called Shiach Hasadeh and called Esef Hasadeh. They interpreted it as all vegetation. So do you see, the idea is there was nothing before that. And here we have this distinction. Now the two terms of vegetation, shrub and plant, may be a merismatic word pair like plant and tree in Genesis 1, 11 and 22, or not just 1, 11. In other words, Siach and Esef probably signify the totality of vegetation, which normally grows in the field. And what conclusion he is doing? In conclusion, the initial state of the earth in Genesis 2, 5 to 6 is described as unproductive in concrete terms. No shrub, no plant, as well as no man to till the land. In other words, the earth in Genesis 2, 5, 6 was also the bare earth, which had no vegetation and no man, like the earth in Genesis 1, 2, which is described as tohu vabohu, though the earth-water relationship is different in the two passages. Okay, so this is one of the way of interpretation of this passage, that these two phrases, bush of the field and grass of the field, should be understood. So he says it is merism, but in fact it is not merism, because merism should take two opposites in order to signify one entity. But it doesn't look that these are two opposites, so we can just classify it like hendiadis, maybe. Yes, and the idea is that it is a reference to the entire vegetation on the earth. So is it clear or not? Do you follow this way of argumentation?
I've followed, but there is a place, your comment, you said that we should understand it as two phrases expressing absence of the vegetation. But they seem to be divided. They seem to be dividing the two. That's where I don't understand properly. What are they dividing? Are they saying it doesn't mean what it says?
Oh, I don't understand your question. What about the division? So what do you think about, what do you say about the division? Dividing.
On the slide before us.
Oh, this one.
This one. This is an interpretation, the way they understood it.
Yes.
So they understood it to mean that there was no one to till the ground, and the shrub or vegetation was not there.
Yes.
So what I don't understand is how different is our view compared to this view.
Okay. Okay. So do you see what is the problem of this interpretation? So in this case, it looks like this is a parallel account of the entire chapter 1. And it looks like there was no plants on the earth. So this is the description of the earth before God created the plants. So in this case, the description of the Garden of Eden, which follows, is like the description of the day number 3. And we can equate this with the day number 3. Okay, do you understand?
Yes, I do.
And that is why the representatives of the framework theory, say that, do you see, this is, there is no sequence here. There is no sequence here. And in this case, we can see just like a topical arrangements of the material. For example, we have Garden of Eden. This is another way to describe how God produced all the vegetation. Okay, and this is the argument that they use to say that we cannot speak about the days, but it is just like a framework of telling us about the creation. So this is not a question about the real days or literal days. Okay? Is it clear?
Prof.
Yes,
Okay.
Prof.
Okay, shall we go further? And of course, in this case, if we take this direction of interpretation, it can bring us to different results. And one more issue that is also important here. So do you see, in this case, the producing of the plants is described as the absence of rains. But absence of rains is not something good. So it looks like this is a bad situation because there was no rain. Okay, but the rain appeared just after the flood, or yeah, during the flood. So there was no rain before. And definitely we cannot say that the absence of vegetation was because of the absence of rain. It is just something that appeared after the fall. Okay? So now, I just would like to introduce to you another interpretation of the same idea suggested by Umberto Cassuto and some other conservative theologians. And what he says, modern commentators usually consider the terms to connote the vegetable kingdom as a whole. Thence it follows that our section contradicts the preceding chapter, according to which vegetation came into being on the third day. Dillman, for example, states that Siach and Esef, the most important categories of the vegetable world, represent the latter in its entirety. So, excuse me. What is Cassuto saying? Is that this is the modern interpretation. And according to this interpretation, this phrase, bush of the field and grass of the field, is used to designate all the vegetation of the world. And he says, but it is difficult to conquer in the view that Siach and Esef are the most important plants and worthy to be mentioned as representative of all vegetation. All interpretation of this kind introduce something into the text that is not there in order to create the inconsistency. When the verse declares that these species were missing, the meaning is simply that these kinds were wanting, but no others. If we wish to understand the significance of the Siach of the field and the Esef of the field in the context of our narrative, we must take a glance at the end of the story. It is stated there in the words addressed by the Lord God to Adam after he had sinned, "Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth to you, and you shall eat the Esef of the field." The words Esef of the field are identical with the expression in our verse, whilst thorns and thistles, which are synonymous with the Siach of the field, are of particularization of the general concept conveyed by the letter. These species did not exist or were not found in the form known to us until after Adam's transgressions, and it was in consequence of his fall that they came into the world or received their present form. So do you see the difference of the interpretation? While others interpret these phrases as the reference to the vegetation in general, Cassuto says that these two phrases refer to the plants that appeared after the fall of Adam. So is it clear?
Yes.
Okay. And he continues. The text doesn't explain the lack of plants of the field in the original world on the basis of a lack of rain. Also, the text doesn't state what the rain situation in the original world was, and thus should not be used for speculating about any kind of strange conceptions about a water cycle in the original world according to Genesis. On the contrary, the text refers to a lack of rain that happened later, a problem which would eventually cause human beings to plant grain in irrigated fields. But that circumstance did not yet exist in the original world, no farmer being present in order to irrigate a field through a canal. So this is another interpretation given by Aesio Kairos. By the way, you will have a class very soon with him, Doctrine of the Sanctuary. Yes?
Yes, Prof.
Yes, beginning 24th of this month.
Okay, so it means do you have a break after this class or no?
There is
24th.
no break.
So next Monday.
24th, yeah.
So next
Yeah,
Monday
next
you will start a class with him. Okay,
yes,
so he is a very knowledgeable man. So he was also my teacher in IAS, and we would like to say that he is like a man encyclopedia. So he is very, very knowledgeable man, and I believe that you are lucky to have a class with him. So he wrote an article, and this article was published in IAS journal. And in this article, this is just a conclusion from this article that I quoted here. And there he argues that this is the description that we can find in Genesis 2, 5, verses 5 and 6. This is the description after the fall. So what happened after the fall, but not the description of the land before the creation. So do you see the difference? By the way, if you want to read his article, I can give you the journal and you can read it.
Yes, please give us.
All the journals, by the way, are available online, so you can just go to JAAS archive and you can download it from there. So now I would like to just emphasize the main idea. So what we have here in this verse 2, 5, and 6, this is not a description of the world before the creation week. But in this case, in these two verses, in this passage, we have just, as do you remember, as I told you, is just like the author when he describes the creation. He anticipates, or just like a, I forgot this word again. Okay, so it is just like an anticipation of the fall, and he explains that the condition of the world was not like after the fall. And what Cassuto says, that this phrase, Esef of the field, grass of the field, is exactly what appeared after the fall. So after the fall, God said that you will eat from the plants of the field. But before that, man was not supposed to eat plant of the field. This was just a food for the animals, but not for the man. So we can see that this is just not a prediction. You cannot understand it, but analepsis. Yeah, this is the term, analepsis. And analepsis is when something in the story is that has not yet happened, but it is described as like a like a like in this situation. It has not happened yet, but this is just a description or just a hint that direct us into this way. So is it clear? And narrative, and Selhammer says the same. The narrative points to the fact that before the man was created, the effects of human rebellion and of the fall had not yet been felt on the land. In the subsequent narratives, each of the parts of the description of the land in verses 4b-6 is specifically identified as a result of the fall. The shrub of the field and the plant of the field are not a reference to the vegetation of chapter 1, but rather anticipate the thorns and thistles and plants of the field which are to come in 3:18 as a result of the curse. So is it clear, or we need to dwell on it more?
I understand it now.
You understand? Yes. Okay. So one more thing that we need to remember here. So when we go back to this one, so look at the description of the man. Ve'adam ayin la'avot et ha'adama. So, and there was no man, as it is translated, to walk on the ground, or to walk with the ground, or something like that. Do you see, when God created a man, he was not supposed to walk on the ground from the very beginning. The same word, avad, is used in Genesis 2:15. But in Genesis 2:15, it describes the walk of the man in the Garden of Eden. So before the fall, the man was not supposed to walk or to toil the ground, but he was supposed to walk in the garden. And only after the fall, he is said to toil the ground. So we can see here that all these ideas here just refer to the state of the man after the fall. Okay?
Yes, bro.
Okay, so if you don't have questions or anything that you would like to discuss, we can discuss. And
I have a question, Prof.
Yes, please.
It's based on your last comment that all these refer to the state of the man after the flood. My problem there is as regards to the Garden of Eden. That was before the fall. So doesn't that the text concern Eden Garden?
Sorry, I cannot hear you well. I cannot hear you well.
Okay, I said that my question is based on your last comment that the text of no man to till the ground refers to after the fall. So has it any connection with the Garden of Eden?
What do you mean connection with the Garden of Eden?
Man was in Eden before the fall.
Yes, man was in Eden before the fall. Okay, let me just show you what the text says. It will be the best way, probably.
Okay, bro.
Where is it? Yeah. Genesis. So do you see Vayikach Adonai Elohim et ha'adam vayanichehu began Eden. So and God took Adam and he placed him in the Garden of Eden. And here is the le'avodach.
Avodah.
Yes, u leshamrach. So here he is set to toil the garden or to walk in the garden.
The garden. Okay.
Yes, but later on, if you go to 3:15. Yes, El Haisha, yes. Ule Adam Amor ki shamata lekol ishtecha vetochal min ha'etz asher tziviticha lemor lo tochal mimenu arura ha'adama be'avorecha be'itzuvun. So now we call, yes. So do you see here is reference to Adama. Adama is cursed.
Okay.
And it will produce for you and you will eat Esef Hasadeh. So, and later on, again, he is related with Adama. So the idea that he is related to Adama occurs just after the fall. So he will walk on the earth after the fall. So when we read in Genesis 2:5-6 that there was no Adam to toil the ground, this is the reference that Adam began toiling the ground only just after the fall. But before the fall, he was walking in the garden, not on the ground.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So Moses was telling an audience who experienced or who knew what it means to toil the ground.
Yes, correct.
And who was also experiencing rainfall.
Yes, and the idea of Kairos article is like this. So it is just a description. This description is very similar to the like a contemporary description of the people during the time of Moses and earlier after the fall. So when they needed the irrigation system and the lack of rains, because of the lack of rains, they needed irrigation system. But this is not a description of the earth before the fall.
Okay.
Or before the beginning of the creation.
Of the creation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so let us make a break.
Professor.
Now I would like to discuss
At his time also here.
I would like to discuss with you another important issue, and this is an issue related to the syntax of the chapter number 2. And I don't have it in the presentation. I just want to show you the Word document. So can you see it? So this chapter number 2 starts with verse number 7. The previous verses we have discussed. And here we can see that the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground, and he blew into his nostrils the what's called Nishmat Hayim, the breath of life, and man became a living soul, So this is, we start the description of the how the man was created, and after that, chapter verse 8, we have Vayita Adonai Elohim gan be'Eden Mikedem. So again, do you see? Pay attention that this is Vayiktol. This is Vayiktol. This is Vayiktol. And this is again Vayiktol. This is again Vayiktol. So it looks like this is a sequential description of the sequential events. So in the beginning, God created man. After that, he planted a garden. And now we have the description how he planted the garden in verses 8 and 9. And now we have like another, it's not an insertion, but just a description, one more description of the garden. So what it looked like. So about the river, and do you see there is no Vayiktol chain here? This is just a description. So this is a Yotze, and Yotze is a participle. So a river was coming out from Adam in order to water the garden. And from there it was divided, and there were four rivers, so like in four parts. Okay, and after that we have the name of one river, the name of another river, the third river, and the fourth river. So we can see the description of the Garden of Eden, and it is clearly that it is not the part of the sequence. So it looks like the author gives us background information about the garden and how it was constructed. And after that, we have a continuation of the sequence. Vayiktol, Vayikach Adonai Elohim et ha'adam, Vayanichechu began Eden. So God took Adam and he placed him in the Garden of Eden. So again, we can see we have Vayiktol chain. Vayitzav, Vayomer. We have the Vayiktol chain, and this Vayiktol chain continues until the end of the chapter, But in this case, we have a problem. So because according to chapter 2, the order of the events should be as follows. In the beginning, God created a man. After that, he planted a garden. After that, he placed man into the garden. And after that, he created animals. And after that, he created a woman. And because this is only here, the Vayiktol chain is interrupted by some description of the Garden of Eden. But in the rest of the chapter, we have clearly the Vayiktol chain. So what can we say about the sequence of the events? Do you have any idea how can we explain it? Are you with me? So are you here?
Yes, Prof, we're here.
Yes, sir.
So okay, so the first question in this case, do you understand the problem that I just described. So
yes,
do you understand
if I understand well,
Yes, bro.
The writer only describes the sequence of the creation of man. I was put in Eden, but he added description of the rivers that were around the Eden, but not in the part of the creation description.
Yeah, it could be the part of the creation description, but it is not given in the form of Vayikol.
Yes.
So that is why we can say that it is just like a background information about how the Garden of Eden was designed, or what was in the garden, or how this irrigation system was working in the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, can we also add that verses 4b to 6 is also part of background or background information, or
so this is not a yes, it is a kind of background information, but as I say, it is so analepsis,
analepsis,
yes, or prolepsis. I'm always confused with these two terms. So this like a author tells us about the future, just describe something that should happen in the future. So in this case, it is like this, and there is no problem with this passage because it's clear it is just a background information. No problem with the passage of Genesis 2, 5, and 6. But if we have a sequential order of events here, so in this case, there is a big problem because in this case, it is not the same order as is given in chapter 1. Because in chapter 1, what we can see, the plants were created on day number 3. The animals were created first, and after that, God created man and woman.
Professor.
Yes.
My thinking, which is subject to discussion, is that in Genesis 1, there was some kind of procedure in terms of the structure. There is a flow procedure because it's a creation aspect. But here, as Cahill points out, the description is more to the position of man in the creation and explaining the circumstances which exerted the greatest influence upon his subsequent life. So I think the author in chapter 2 is not clearly mapping out the sequence, but explaining the circumstances that resulted into the state of man. And in that sense, the environment in which man was found takes up a bit of the, he first of all introduces man and then dwells more on the environment and the circumstance. So it's not in the sequential order as we have seen it in Genesis 1. That is my thinking. It's not a description more of the chronological order of the creation, but rather...
Yes, I agree with you. But the problem is, in this case, why did he use Vayikol chain? Because Vayikol chain is just for the sequential events.
Yes, probably. Also, I was looking at it in terms of, because when you put something in the background and you want to bring something back to the front line of the discussion, the progressive nature, you can use the Vayikol, not necessarily that the events are following. Because the one you described that is in the background, the rivers, is more of the descriptive element. But then when he comes back to the Vayikol, he's bringing the central aspect, which is more about the garden, the tree, and what affects man. What has an effect on man and whatever happens. So I'm thinking of it more in bringing the story back on the front to continue with the focus area.
Okay, thank you. Just a minute, please. I want to. I just want to bring to your attention the article by John Collins, and the title of the article is "The Vehicle as Perfect: When and Why." So this is more like an article about syntax, Hebrew syntax. But what is interesting, in the end of his article, he tries to apply it to some cases, and one of the cases is Genesis 2:19. So what is his main idea? It is true, and you can find it in every grammar book, that Vaiktol is usually used just only for the past events that took place in sequential order. And almost all grammarians say like this. But language is a kind of constant anomaly, in terms that anomaly usually often takes place in the language. And he actually noticed that there are some cases, when Vaiktol is used not just for description of the events that follow each other, but Vaiktol is also could be used as a pluperfect, or if we speak in English terms, past perfect, that events that took place before some events in the past. And he considered several examples, like, for example, here, and she, Jezebel, wrote Vatiktov letters in the name of Ahab, and she sealed them, Vatachtom, with the seal, and she sent Vatishlach letters to the elders and to the nobles who were in his city, who sat with Naboth. And she wrote in the letters saying, and he, for example, explains that the verses 8 are all in Vaiktol forms, as is the verb that begins verse 9. This verb repeats the first verb of verse 8, and thus is prior to the remaining verse of verse 8. And they found similar phenomena like this when we have Vaiktol form, and the Vaiktol form, as for example in this case, it is very clear that it looks like she used the sequential order, and after that the author comes back to the first one, Vatiktov, and it is clear that this Vaiktol should be before she sealed the letters and sent them. So this is just a clear case when we have Vaiktol that is used as a pluperfect. And they also mention some of other cases like this. He mentions like 2 Kings chapter 7, and it happened while he, as man of God, was speaking to the king, and the officer answered via unto the man of God and said, Vayomer. And the man of God said, Vayomer. These verbs are referring back to the action that took place in verses 1-2 of the chapter. And after the narrator has told us what happened after verses 1-2, the link to verses 1-2 is provided by the explicit repetition, which serves as a back reference, anaphora. So we can see the same case here, and he mentions some other cases where we have a similar phenomenon when Vaiktol is used to refer to the actions that happened before the mainstream of the narrative. And in the end, what he wants to say, he wants to apply these rules. I don't want to read with you the entire article. I just want to show you how he describes it on several examples. Yes, and here we have application. First Samuel we will skip, and Genesis 2:19. And he says, the creation narrative of Genesis 1, 1, 2, 3 presents the origin of the world in 6 days, which are generally taken to be broadly sequential. The fifth day, Genesis 1, 22, 23, recounts the creation of the birds, while the sixth day tells of creation of land animals, followed by the creation of man. The so-called second creation account, Genesis 2, verses 4 to 25, has the creation of man apparently followed by the formation of the Garden of Eden and the formation of the animals and birds. The apparent sequence of Genesis 2 is conveyed by vehicle verb forms, and if these are understood sequentially, as is the normal use, then Genesis 2 seems to be at odds with Genesis 1. This disagreement in order is one of the building blocks of the theory that finds in these chapters evidence of combination from separate sources. Yes, of course, the critical scholars usually explain this kind of phenomena as a reference to different sources that were stewed together, and most probably the man who put everything together was not very didn't care very much about these syntactical issues. So what he says that most probably we can understand 2:19 as the pluperfect, although it is in the vehicle form, and he explains it later. But let me go back to the. You can have this article, by the way. You can find it just on the internet. It is in a free access. Let me go back here, and here what we have. So it is clear that God created a man. After that, he planted a garden, and this is done in sequential order. So in this case, we cannot read the creation of the garden as the parallel account of the third day of creation. So it is clear that it is not the case. So God first created a man, and after that he created a garden. And here we have the description of the garden. There's no problem with that. And after that we have again the continuation of the sequence, that the God Lord took a man and placed him in the garden that was just created, and he gave them the command. And after that, he said, it is not good for a man to be alone. And he wanted to create a helper, or somebody who would be with him, beside him, according to him. And after that, we have a story about creating of all animals. But among the animals, there was no anybody who would fit Adam. And after that, we have the creation of a woman. So what John Collins says, that this passage, 19 and 20, so this verse only verse 19, is should be understood. This verse should be understood as a like a flashback, or how he says, anaphora, or the story that was done before the mainstream of the narrative. So he suggests to read this one, Vayitzar Adonai Elohim Minha Adama. This one is just a pluperfect. So it was done before. But now it is mentioned. So is it clear?
No, Prof. Allow me to take you back to the sequence that you said God created man, and then the garden, and then man is lonely, and then a woman is created.
Yes.
Now, wouldn't this be used to challenge the the 6 day literal 6 literal days of creation. It seems there was a gap in between man, garden, and then woman. And then someone asked me recently, and from this, I'm seeing where he was coming from. He was saying like Adam and Eve were not created the same day. Eve was created later.
Why?
And I'm seeing it because unless I did not get you clearly that God created man first, then created the garden, then in that garden is where man was lonely and a woman was created. Or maybe I did not get you right.
Yes. So
how do we reconcile this? How do we reconcile this with the creation of man and woman being created on the same day?
So it is. It's good. So do you see? This is the description what we have here. The description of what happened on the 6th day. So, and the order of events according to this is following. God created a man, then he created a garden, and he placed man into the garden. And after that, he said, it is not good for man to be alone, and he created a woman for him. And
I get the point.
Yes, and no. What we can say, what happened? So God said, it is not good for man to be alone. And after that, he brought to him all the animals. Adam gave names to all the animals, but because the helper, the spouse was not found for him among the animals, so God said, okay, let us make a woman, and he made a woman.
Okay, I get it. It's the event of
so
one
everything
day.
happened the same at the same day, on the same day. It was not like different days.
Okay, a gap.
Professor.
Yes.
Thank you. I get it
Professor.
now. Thank you, Prof.
Yes, please, Pastor Nicholas.
Is it only verse 19 or verse 20 as well that acts as a flashback?
No. I think that only the flashback is only 19. Just let me remove the...
Because the verse 18 says, and God says it is not good that man should be alone. I'll make him a helper. But verse 20 is a continuation, in my view,
of the verse 19.
Of the naming, verse 20 and 19. Verse 20 is a continuation of the naming, which is part of verse 19.
Yes, I understand what you're talking about.
Because when you put verse 18 with verse 21, there is a continuation.
So, okay, and man, and God created a man from the earth. And God created from the earth all the animals.
Yes.
All the birds.
And brought them.
And do you see, and all the birds as well is here. But birds are created on the day number 5, and all animals day number 6. Hashamayim vayabo el ha'adam lirot. So in this case, what we need to understand that only the first line of the sentence should be understood as a flashback.
Yes, Prof, my argument was...
Yes, continue, please. Yes. Oh, sorry, we cannot hear you well. Pastor Nicholas, we cannot hear you.
Sorry, I think there was a... I was saying that since the first verb, the one that is in the Waiktor, which is now acting as a pluperfect, is controlling the next of the events, that's why I was talking about the verse, as in the idea, the entire idea that is imported to flash on the present circumstance.
Okay.
My understanding is that these were created before man was created.
Yes.
The author here is focused on the interest of the creation of the woman, and probably giving a pretext to what transpired before that event. So I would, my view is to place verse 19 and 20 before verse 18 in terms of thought, if the pluperfect.
Okay, but it looks like it will not work out. So do you see, it seems to me that let me make it on one page. Yes. Vayomar Adonai Elohim Lotov Hayot Ha'adam Levado Yasech Lo Ezef Kenegdo. So this is what God said. It is not good for Adam to be alone. Let us make a helper to him. And if we understand this just phrase as a pluperfect, that God had formed from the earth all living creatures, yes, of the field and all the birds of the heaven. And now Vayave is the continuation of the sequence of verse number 18.
It's clear proof.
Yes, and he brought to Adam to see how he called them. And after that, we have just a continuation of the sequence. He called all of them, but he was not able to find Ezer or helper. And after that, we have again continuation. So he put a dream upon him. So he made him to sleep, and he made a woman. He made a woman. So in this case, if you treat just only this sentence, only this first clause as a pluperfect, so we don't have any problem here. And Collins mentions some cases when it really happens, when we have Vaiktol, but it is clear from the narrative that it could not be the sequential order, but Vaiktol refers to something that happened in the past.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Prof. It's clear. It's now it is clear in my mind.
Yeah. So and so far as I see, this is like the best explanation that we could have about this sequence, because do you see the argument that it is like a sequential order is very, very strong, because Vaiktol is usually mostly used as a sequential events, describing sequential events, and it is a big problem. But if we explain it like this, so there is no problem at all. But what it means that we cannot equate Garden of Eden, we cannot make it equal Garden of Eden and the third day of creation. So it means that God created a special place, and it happened on the sixth day. And this special place is the Garden of Eden for human living. So it looks like the whole earth was created for all other animals to live, but the Garden of Eden was created just for man. Okay. Any questions about that? No. Okay. So let us continue. By the way, if you want to have this article by Collins, I can just put it in our folder, but it is in the free access, so you can just find on internet Vaiktol as Pluperfect by Collins, and you can easily find this article. Now we need to discuss another important issue, and this is also, sometimes it is a debatable issue, but it looks like more and more scholars agree on this, and that the Garden of Eden is described as a sanctuary. And I'm more than sure that when you study the doctrine of the sanctuary very soon with Dr. Kairos, you will mention this again. I just based my presentation on the article by Richard Davidson, Earth First Sanctuary, Genesis 1:3, and Parallel Creation Accounts. So the article is quite long that he wrote, but I don't want to pay attention to the entire article, but only to the part of the article when he describes the Garden of Eden as a sanctuary. And what is surprising here that the first people who paid attention that the Garden of Eden is described as a sanctuary were not the Adventists. For example, it seems to me Gordon Wenham in his commentary on the book of Genesis wrote about that, and some other commentators also indicated that the Garden of Eden has some ideas, or there is a connotation of the sanctuary behind it. And later on, the Adventist theologians also noticed it, and they wrote very much about that. And article by Richard Davidson is one of some articles written on the Garden of Eden as a sanctuary. What he says, there is an emerging consensus among biblical scholars that the pre-fall Garden of Eden and its surroundings is to be regarded as the original sanctuary on earth, a copy of the sanctuary temple in heaven. So now I'm not sure about this copy of the sanctuary temple in heaven, but it's really true that it is presented as the sanctuary. And of course, it is a completely different idea of the sanctuary, because usually when we speak about the sanctuary, we are used to have in our mind a picture of a building or something similar to the building. But it is not always the case, because we can find many other examples when the sanctuary was not associated with the building. The best probably example here is Genesis chapter 28, Genesis chapter 28. And in this chapter, you can find that Jacob, when he was traveling from his father to Laban, to Haran, he saw a dream, he saw a vision in a dream, and in this vision, he saw a staircase which was going up to heaven. And when he saw this staircase, he actually said that this is the gate of heaven, and this is the house of God. And the house of God is Bethel, and because of that, the name of this place was Bethel, the house of God. But what is surprising there, that Jacob didn't build anything at that place. So what he just did, he upon the return from Haran to the Promised Land, he built an altar there, and there was no house there. But we can argue that it was like a paradigm before the Sinai covenant, when the patriarchs made altars on the earth and brought the sacrifices. It was like a conflation of heaven and earth. And at the moment when they brought sacrifices at the altar, the heaven, or the heavenly sanctuary, was approaching this place. So that is why he said that this is like a channel of connection between the earth and the heaven. Okay, so another example of the sanctuary which is not related to the building is the Mount Sinai. And I can also refer you to the article by Angel Rodriguez, when he explains that the Mount Sinai functioned as a sanctuary with the three divisions of holiness, like the place where Moses built an altar was equivalent to the yard of the sanctuary. After that, we have a place where Moses and the elders, the 70 elders, came to one point of one point on the mountain and saw God. It was an equivalent of the holy place. And after that, Moses himself went to the top of the mountain, and it was like the most holy place. So we can again see that it was not related, or it was not obligatory to be a building in order to be a sanctuary. And I believe you will speak more on your class in your class on the sanctuary, and I am more than sure that you will enjoy it. Okay, so now what kind of arguments Davidson uses? By the way, in the beginning of his article, what he says is that this idea that Garden of Eden is a sanctuary is a very common idea among the scholars, but the purpose of his particular article is to combine all the arguments together in one place and to present a comprehensive picture of arguments that prove that the Garden of Eden is a sanctuary. For example, he says, the most explicit indicator that the Garden of Eden is considered a sanctuary temple is the occurrence of the term Eden, which probably means land of bliss, happy land, and its identification as a garden, viewed in comparison with identical terminology in Ezekiel 28. In Ezekiel 28:13, the same two crucial words found in Genesis 2:8 are used together again. The covering cherub is described being in Eden, the garden of God, while he was yet perfect. So in this case, it is clear that what is described in Ezekiel 28 is a heavenly sanctuary. So he was in the garden, and the garden is most probably is the reference to the heavenly sanctuary. So that is why we can say that Garden of Eden is also a sanctuary. The Garden of Eden was situated with an eastward orientation. So the entrance was, it was said in the beginning that it was placed from the entrance was from the east. And later on we can see that when Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden, so they went to the east. And later on we can see when Cain committed a murder, he was expelled even further to the east. So it looks like this direction, going to the east means going away from the sanctuary, and the entrance to the sanctuary was from the east. And this is the same when we see the construction of the tabernacle, because in the tabernacle also the entrance was from the east. And the word plants, natah, Hebrew verb natah, God plants the Garden of Eden, just as he will plant Israel on his holy mountain, the place of his sanctuary. So this is another verb that is used that relates Garden of Eden with the sanctuary. Also, what is important, the images of nature that we can find in the sanctuary later on. And it looks like those images of nature is like a flashback or reference to the Garden of Eden nature. And in this case, the tabernacle and the temple later on was like a replica or duplication or a reminder of the Garden of Eden. Like 13 times in Genesis 2:3, the space in Eden is called a garden, which in context describes not a vegetable garden, but a park or even a tropical paradise, filled with lush vegetation and teeming with animal life. The references to the portrayals of the natural world in the later centuries seems to hark back to this Eden paradise. There is in the Mosaic tabernacle the 7-branch lampstand in the shape of an almond tree with flowers A lily walk appeared on the tops of the two freestanding pillars of Solomon temple, and representation of oxen, lions, and more lilies and palm trees in the lava, carved in Solomonic architecture on the walls round about and on the doors were palm trees and open flowers. This artistic portrayal seems to be representative of the return to the lost garden, the Earth's original sanctuary. And also some scholars find some parallels between the tree of life and the menorah. So we can see that it's really something similar here. In the midst, so in the middle of the garden, the tree of life was in the midst of the garden, and this is the precise term for the living presence of God in the midst of his people in the sanctuary. In the Mosaic sanctuary and Solomonic temple, the ark symbolizing the presence of God on his throne was located at the exact center of the quadrangle of holy space containing the sanctuary building proper. So this is one more parallel. And of course, the river of life. There was a four-headed river flowing from the Eden garden parallel to the river of life, which was to flow from the sanctuary shown to Ezekiel and other prophets like Zechariah, Joel, and from the throne of God is shown to John in the book of Revelation. So another point of comparison, and it's a very, very clear point, that the river that is coming from the Garden of Eden, and later on we can see that river that is coming from the mountain, or in case of Revelation, the river is coming also from New Jerusalem. So this is clear that all those factors indicate or point out to Garden of Eden as the first sanctuary. One more interesting observation that
yes, Prof.
Davison is doing. Yes, please.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that the tree of life, was it a symbol of the presence of God in the garden?
Yeah, he mentions both of them. Like menorah is like a representation of the tree of life. And here he says about tree of life was in the midst, and tree of life was like a symbolic place of the presence of the Lord. So in this case, we can see that it is parallel to the presence of the Lord in the Mosaic and Solomonic temple, Mosaic tabernacle and Solomonic temple.
Prof, can we have break again?
Pardon, Pastor?
Can we have break again?
Or do you want to have a break? Okay, let us have a break.
Thank you, Prof.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Prof.
Yes.
Prof.
Yes.
My internet is disturbing me here, but I have a question.
Yes, please.
Did God create another world after the fall of Adam, or the Garden of Eden was part of the universe, I mean the world, and which one was cast? You know, there is that thing that disturbs always.
Can you explain again? What is the question?
Adam and Eve, they were in the Garden of Eden.
Yes.
And after fall, they were chased out of the Garden of Eden.
Yes.
Now, my question is, this world where we are living, I hope it's where they were sent after falling in the Garden of Eden.
Yes.
Now, my question is, was it already there, or it was created after Adam's fall?
Okay, yes, it's a good question. Thank you for it. And let me go back to this Let me go back to the text of the Bible. So do you see, it looks like the world was created. Oh, it's better maybe to go to the accordance. Is it? Yeah. So it looks like the world was created, but the Bible tells about the difference between the garden and the rest of the world. Yes. So make it bigger. And the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he put the man whom he had formed. Yes, and out of the ground the Lord God made to spring up every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. So it looks like the garden was a special place, and the eretz, or the land, was the rest of the place. So the garden was a sanctuary, is a special place created by God where a man should live, and everything else is just eretz, or land. And when Adam was expelled from the garden, so he went to live on the earth, and the earth, or Adamah, is cursed. But this curse, of course, is not spread upon the Garden of Eden. So it looks like the Garden of Eden was the special place on the earth. And what we know, Ellen G. White says that after the fall, Adam and Eve continued to come and worship God in the entrance of the garden. So it looks like the altar was built there, and they built an altar there, and they worshiped God at the entrance of the garden. But before the flood, the garden was taken away from the earth, and it was not there anymore. So we remained on the earth that was cursed because of our sins. Did I answer your question?
Yes, Prof. I've got it right.
Okay. So let's continue with the presentation. And so river of life, it seems to me, yes, we said about this. The mountain of God is also another interesting feature that Richardson noticed. So when we look at the description of the river that was coming out of Eden, it looks like the same river was divided into four different rivers, and they were flowing in different directions. And he says that it is possible only in case if the source of the river is at the top of the mountain. So if we have the top of the mountain, in this case, we can see that the river can go from and go into different directions when the source is at the top. And he actually assumes that it is a fact or argument that the Garden of Eden was placed at the elevated position or on the mountain. The four rivers flow from a common source in four different directions. And this seems possible only if the rivers are flowing down from an elevated location or from the mountain. This comports with the location of the heavenly sanctuary on the mountain of God, which is described in the book of Ezekiel and Isaiah, and the location of Solomon's temple as the mountain of the Lord and Mount Zion as well. So this is also a very interesting argument that we can find here. And also precious metals of the sanctuary. We can see that in the Garden of Eden, there are some metals are mentioned which are precious, like gold, bdellium, and onyx. they are the same elements are mentioned in the connection with the wilderness sanctuary, like Bdellium or Bdolach, only elsewhere in the Old Testament in connection with the manna, some of which was stored in or beside the ark, onyx or Hebrew shocham, upon the shoulder pieces and the breastplate of the high priest, and the pure gold. It is also like a common metal that is used for the utensils of the sanctuary. So in this case, we can also see some connections between the Garden of Eden and the sanctuary. And also what is important, this is the ministry of man, Adam and Eve. So when we can see that their occupation in the Garden of Eden is described as avad and shamar. And avad is a verb for walking and shamar is for keeping. So they are supposed to walk in the garden and keep it. But what is also interesting, the same two verbs, avad and shamar, are used to describe the ministry of the Levites in the sanctuary. So based on this parallel, many scholars agree that the occupation of man or the like business of man in this sanctuary was not so much to avad, means to toil the garden or to hard work in the garden, but this is another way to describe the ministry of first man as a priestly ministry. So the first man, Adam and Eve, or just Adam, we don't know because the text says only about Adam, was supposed to be a priest in the Garden of Eden, and it also says that the Garden of Eden was supposed to be a sanctuary. Okay, so yes, and tripartite structure, and I also mentioned it, and Richardson also makes an emphasis here. So we have the larger area of Eden, the garden planted eastward in Eden, and we have in the midst of the garden. And it can correspond to the tripartite division of the sanctuary, like yard of the sanctuary, holy place, and most holy place. And it also corresponds to the three spheres at the Mount Sinai, like, for example, the camp of the Israelites, the place where the 70 elders went on the mountain, and the immediate presence of God where only Moses went at the very top of the mountain. They are repeated in the court of the holy place, as I mentioned, and in the Solomon temple. So all these elements tell us that, in fact, the Garden of Eden could be considered as the first sanctuary. So do you have any questions?
Yes, it's not a question, Prof. I think I also am in support of that because it was also a meeting place for God and the people he created. I think what makes a sanctuary special is the presence of God.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that it is just a meeting place, because do you see, when we speak about the meeting place, it means that it is just the place where we meet from time to time.
Yeah.
Like, for example, we come to the center, to the church to worship God, and this is a meeting place. But what is interesting, that Adam and Eve were supposed to live in Eden forever. I mean, they were not supposed to live outside the Garden of Eden, but just inside the garden. So they were supposed to be always in the sanctuary. And also we can find some more particular correspondence or some interesting parallels, that the high priest was also supposed to be always in the sanctuary. And what is surprising, when you read chapter 8 of the book of Leviticus, that the high priest was anointed 2 times. And in this chapter, chapter 8 of the book of Leviticus, we can see that the sanctuary or tabernacle was anointed. And after it was anointed, the high priest was anointed. So what is surprising, for the first time, high priest should be anointed together with the sanctuary. So the sanctuary with all its furniture was anointed, and the high priest, as a part of the sanctuary, he was anointed together with the sanctuary. And the next time, Aaron is anointed together with his sons, so as a priest. So in this case, it is just like a very interesting detail that the high priest was supposed to be like a part of the sanctuary, like a part of the furniture of the sanctuary. So he's supposed to be there always. And I believe that Adam and Eve also were supposed to be there in the Garden of Eden always. So they were not supposed to leave the Garden of Eden, but to live there all the time. So in this case, they should be always in the presence of the Lord. So it is not just a meeting place, as I see.
Okay, Prof.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Is everything clear? Now, let us go to another topic. So probably we just started today and we will continue. Yes.
Excuse me, Prof.
Yes.
I don't understand this idea of tripartite. Is it correlated to that Trinity, or
No.
is it just in 3 parts?
No. It's not correlated to the Trinity. We don't speak, but 3 parts of the sanctuary. Let me show you another picture.
Oh, okay.
Just a minute, please. I believe I can find it fast, and it seems to me it is on the internet. Sinai. Yeah. Oops. It's not this one. Where is it? Oh, yeah. So this is the article by Angel Rodriguez. And this is the picture that he made in his article, Sanctuary Theology in Exodus. So what he says here about the tripartite or tripartite division is, for example, the Mount Sinai had this tripartite division. This is correspond to the court, the place where Moses built an altar, and this is the place where all the people could stand, but they cannot go further. But after that, we can see that Moses and the 70 elders came to one point at the mountain, and they saw God, and they ate and drank with God. And after that, Moses went to the top of the mountain, but he went alone. He didn't go with anybody else. So in this case, all these 3 parts or 3 areas correspond to the tripartite division of the sanctuary. Like we have a court, and after that we have a holy place, and we have a most holy place. So what Richardson says, that we have the same correspondence, like 3 parts we have in the Garden of Eden. There is a larger area of Eden, the garden planted eastward in Eden, and the midst of the garden. So this is just a center where the tree of life was planted. So in this case, we can assume that when Adam and Eve were expelled, so where they were expelled from to the eastward to the Eden, and they were expelled to the outer land, so they are not anymore in the Garden of Eden. Okay, so is it clear?
Yes, now I
Explain it to
understand.
you. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Okay, if no questions, so let's continue with the Sabbath. So our next topic is Sabbath, and probably we will not be able to finish it today, but I just want to introduce you to some problematic issues that we have when we speak about the Sabbath in the Genesis narrative. So, and now I just mentioned some of the challenges that some theologians usually present when they speak that it is not, so when they do not agree that this passage, Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, speaks about the Sabbath. First of all, this is the absence of the evening-morning formula. And as I believe, we as Adventists do not pay much attention to this detail of the narrative, the absence of the evening-morning formula. So do you see some other people, like the representatives of the framework theory, they based a special theology of Sabbath on this idea. And do you see such people like Walton and some others? They do not disregard the Sabbath. They say that the Sabbath is correct, is okay, but it is not referred to man, but it is mostly for God, because God is described as the person who rested on Sabbath, not about the man. So again, this one is next one is that there is no explicit command to keep the Sabbath in Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 to 3. So what does it mean? It means like it looks like God didn't want, or it was not the original intention of God that people should keep the Sabbath. Yes, because only God was resting. And also, it is just a minor issue, the absence of the noun Shabbat. So we can see that God ceased his work, and the verb Shabbat is used, but there is no any kind of a name for the day, just the seventh day, and that's all. So that is why these are some of the arguments that scholars put forward in order to say that the Sabbath that is mentioned in Genesis 2 is not obligatory for all the people, but it was given later on as a obligation for the Jewish people. And this is just a quotation from one article written by our Adventist theologian, Ross Cole, and he says, he tries to comment on the absence of the evening-morning formula. The first 6 days of creation are designed as two parallel panels, where days of one panel correspond to the days of another one. Each day is ended with the evening-morning formula. No reference to an evening and a morning would be expected in connection with the seventh day, since the account of this day stands outside the parallel structure of the first 6 days. So I think his argument is quite clear. He says that, do you see there is like two panels, and we saw those panels very well. and to each day of these two panels, this formula applied. But because the seventh day is completely different, so we don't have the repetition of this formula. But this is a kind of explanation, but this explanation doesn't explain everything in this issue. So we don't have any explanation why it is absent, just because it is just a separate day or not a day as all other days. But there is no very clear explanation about that. Absence of the explicit command. Nils Erik Andreasson, our Adventist theologian, explains this absence, noting that the passage focuses on divine rather than human Sabbath keeping. But this one is also not a very compelling argument, because this is exactly the argument that use the representatives of the framework theory to say that it is just God rested and his rest continues until now, because there is no evening morning formula, and the rest of God doesn't stop. So he is resting upon until now. But yes.
Excuse me, Prof.
Yes.
That comment looks one thing, because if they are saying that there is no noun for Sabbath in Genesis,
yeah,
and on that account, then the Sabbath should not be based on that. And yet, on the same account, they are also using Hebrews to discount, to credit the rest, which is forever. Isn't it not a double standard?
Yeah, because maybe.
If they're using Hebrews, we can also use another text to show that the Sabbath is valid, not just for Israelites. But this is a case where they're discounting one text, and yet they're using another text to support this.
Thank you for your comment. Yeah, it's true that we need to take into consideration all the texts about that. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So when we speak about the absence of the explicit command, I would like to quote Matilda Fry, our also Adventist theologian, and she wrote a dissertation on Sabbath in the Pentateuchal texts. And in her dissertation, she addresses this particular issue. Even though the passage of the seventh day does not mention the man and the woman, and the text makes clear that God is the only being in view, the reader cannot forget God's astonishing desire for relationship when he exclaimed, "Let us make man as our image, according to our likeness." Immediately after the creation of man, God grants his gift to both man and woman, namely all creation. Therefore, on the seventh day, God not only establishes an imitating pattern of rhythm for life to be followed by man, but also places himself within this day by sanctifying it for the sake of open access between him and human existence. So the main argument is, yes, there is no a command to keep the Sabbath in this case, but she says that because God created man in his image and his likeness, so that is why a man was supposed to imitate God. And if God rested on the seventh day, so the same should do a man. So is that clear?
Yes, of course.
The only thing that I regret about in his dissertation, that she doesn't pay attention to the fact, and she doesn't explain it, that there is no evening morning formula. So he just avoided this question, and she didn't explain it at all. By the way, her advisor, if I'm not mistaken, was Roy Gain. Okay, the next one is absence of the noun Shabbat. But yes, the noun Shabbat is absent from the narrative, But we have another word that is used as a verb, Shabbat. And Shabbat means to cease, to stop walking. And in this case, we can see some connections with the Sabbath. So the Sabbath is to stop walking and to have rest. Okay, do you have any questions so far about that?
Can the evening morning sequence of the other days, day 1 to 6, be used to argue out that day 7 was a day just like those others, evening and morning, following the sequence? Can we use that to argue for day 7?
Oh yeah, so do you see, in this case, we cannot argue like this because of the absence of the formula. So in this case, it looks like day 7 is a special day, not like all other days. And the absence of formula, because of the absence of formula, it looks like it didn't stop, it didn't finish. So it looks like it is going on. So this is what the representatives of the framework theory say. So this day didn't finish, it continues. Yes, please, Pastor Nicholas.
What about the interpretation God attaches to it through the commandment?
Oh, yeah, this is the big issue.
Because the commandment brings the creative week in view in the form of the day.
Yes.
Could that therefore be the means that is in the term the significance?
Yes, of course.
Rather than the fact that it is.
Yes, but what does the commandment say? The commandment doesn't say that
in 6 days God created the heavens.
Just in 6 days God created
and rested
heavens
on the
and
7th day.
And he rested on the 7th day. So that is why we need to keep walking 6 days.
And so the command is that people should also rest. So yes, because if you are to define the 7th for rest, then you must look at the week as in the days, the numerical days.
Actually, that was my argument, because if we accept the rest of the days, the first 6 as evening and morning, now then if we have to make 7 the day, then it means we have to accept the sequence.
Yes, I agree with you. There is a sequence. And of course, the 7th day follows the 6th day. But why did not Moses say that was evening, morning, day 6 or day 7?
Probably because it had already been established that a day is evening and morning. Probably it is already established in the 6 days of creation.
Okay.
I'm trying to imagine. I'm not sure.
Yes, Prof.
Yes, please.
Yeah, it's already implied in the understanding.
Sorry.
Yeah, Pastor Guillermo, please continue.
I was saying that it was already implied in the understanding and practice of the people that Sabbath is from evening to evening. So to Moses' audience, it was never an issue, because somewhere a feast should be celebrated from evening to evening. That should be somewhere in the book of Leviticus. So for him and his audience, that was never an issue.
Yeah, but the question is, so it would be like more natural if this formula was applied to the Sabbath day, and in this case, there would be no more problem at all. Yes, Pastor Nicholas.
I was thinking, when you look at the first 6 days, there was something that was brought in view. light, the heavens, the create. But on the seventh, it's only the rest that is brought in view. So it's a while the rest, the formula is not creating anything like in the previous days, but the assumption set like it's good, then the evening and the following process. Okay. And when you go to the commandment, there's a separation also in the God created in the 6 days, but the seventh day rested. So there is that distinction. It's like a recourse from the work.
Okay, thank you for all of your comments.
It's a wild view, of course. Just
thank you for all of your comments. Now, I would like to pay your attention to the text itself. And first of all, of course, we don't have time enough to discuss everything. We will continue tomorrow. But I would like to invite you to think about one particular interesting verb that is used in Genesis 2:15. So this is the text that you can see it right now. Vayikach Adonai Elohim et ha'adam vayanichechu began Eden le'avdach avedach le'shamerach. No, le'shomerach and le'ovdach. Yeah, because this is Kemetz Chatuv here. So now, if translated literally, by the way, this text is not translated well in none of the existing translations of the Hebrew Bible, and it is not translated well because of the it is not a deficiency of the translators, but the problem is it's very difficult to translate it and to explain everything that is here in this text. So I will try to translate it literally. Vayikach Adonai Elohim et ha'adam, and Lord God took Adam, and the next one is Vayanichechu. So this verb is the verb noach or nuch, and it means actually to give rest. So the translation would be, and God took Adam and gave him rest in the Garden of Eden in order to walk it and in order to keep it. So there is one problem here with this pronominal suffix, because it looks like gan is masculine, but the pronominal suffix is feminine. But since it is a common problem with the ancient Hebrew, when they sometimes confuse the pronominal suffix, the gender of the pronominal suffix, so probably you don't need to pay much attention to that. Or maybe Eden was a kind of feminine noun, that is why we have feminine pronominal suffix here. But my main question is about how shall we translate the verb nuch or nuach here. So it looks like there is a kind of a contradiction. So God took man and gave him rest in the Garden of Eden so that he can walk and walk in it and keep it. So this idea of rest, of course, contradicts the idea of walking and keeping. So that is why most of the translations use not the word give rest, but they use something like he put Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden to avoid this seeming contradiction. Okay, just think about how to understand or how to interpret this verse, and we will continue tomorrow. Do you have any questions?
Prof.
Yes.
Does this study also cover something to do with the how to keep the Sabbath?
Oh, of course, everything is related. And the question of how to keep the Sabbath is very important. Of course, it is just a practical question, but do you see this question was like a key point for Pharisees during the time of Jesus? And of course, sometimes it is a key point for us as well. When people usually ask pastor how to keep the Sabbath, what shall I do on Sabbath, or what shall I not do on Sabbath, and many, many other issues like this.
Yeah, because there is this issue of not lighting the fire when people try to connect it with the Exodus. Exodus experience. So I think you will need to help us tomorrow in that regard.
Okay, we will try to do this.
They normally quote that God refused them to light fire.
Yes, so this is a big issue about lighting fire. And personally, I don't have, how to say, exhaustive answer to this moment. But the problem is, and many our adversaries emphasize this, so they usually say, if you want to keep the Sabbath, you should keep the Sabbath as the Jewish people did it.
I think what can help us, Prof, if you can help us know the historical background of that event, why God refused them to light fire, it will help us.
Yes, of course, this is the issue. And I just recently finished teaching the Pentateuch class to the MD group, and we also raised a question about the commandments. So what kind of commandments we need to keep, and what kind of commandments we are not binding for us anymore. And my personal idea is that we cannot say that we need only to keep the moral commandments, and everything else which is not related to moral commandments we should not keep, because in this case many commandments is like questionable. And first of all, the question is about the food commandment. For example, we cannot classify Leviticus 11 as a moral law, although some people try to do this. And some Adventist theologians also try to do this and say that this is a kind of a moral law. But we cannot say that this is a moral law. Or some other issues that are also related to some purity laws, for example. There is a question, for example, about a woman during the days of purification. She is supposed to be unclean, and she is supposed to stay at home and not to contaminate anybody else. So shall we keep this in our today's life or not? And many other questions like this. And my approach to all these commandments is very simple. So I believe that God didn't give commandments to the Israelites just to make their life difficult. Because when we look at many of those laws that is in the Pentateuch, so it looks like those laws just made a life of the people very difficult. But behind every law there is a rationale. So God didn't want to make his people just to keep many laws without any purpose. But every law had a special rationale, had a special purpose. So for us, the most important issue is to understand the universal principle that God put in every commandment. And this universal principle became became always relevant for every generation, for every people, for every nation. But we cannot just say that this law is just a ritual law and we shouldn't keep it anymore. Just a good example about the ritual law, because some people say that we are Christians, we don't need to keep ritual laws anymore. But what is the universal principle behind the ritual law? So if I committed a sin, I need to make a sacrifice. So somebody should die for me. And this is like a universal principle. And I cannot say that it is not binding for us anymore, because if I commit a sin, it means that somebody should die for me. And this is remain the same. But the only thing that we don't bring animals, because the perfect sacrifice was already offered for all of us, and this is the offering of Jesus Christ. So that is why I believe that all laws of the Old Testament are still binding for the people, but of course not in the form that they are given in the Old Testament. But in order to understand how to keep those laws, we need to understand the principle inside the law and this universal principle. And this universal principle is still applicable to all of us. Okay, sorry for this little bit, how to say, going astray from our main course. So now I believe that we can adjourn our meeting and we can be dismissed. If you have any questions, so please ask and we can pray.